Helen Sullivan sat in her favorite armchair by the window, sipping a cup of tea as she gazed out over the quiet streets of suburban Chicago. Her home, a modest two-story house, had been her sanctuary for over 40 years. It was a place filled with memories of her late husband, Frank. He had been the dreamer, the one with big plans and grand visions. Helen had always been the steady one, making sure the bills were paid, managing the finances, and ensuring the household ran smoothly. Frank's sudden death 5 years ago had left a void, but she had found strength in her independence. Over the years, Helen had built a successful business of her own and ensured her financial security. The house was hers, free and clear. It had become more than just a home. It was a testament to her resilience and hard work. But now, as she sipped her tea, there was an unsettling feeling in her chest, one she couldn't shake. She'd just received a phone call from her son, David, and it had left her feeling uneasy. There was something in his voice, an odd tension she couldn't quite place. The phone rang again, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Hi, Mom," David's voice came through, a little too cheerful but strained. "I just wanted to let you know the lawyers set up a meeting for tomorrow. It's about Dad's will. You should come." Helen froze. The will. She hadn't thought about it in years. Frank had always taken care of the finances, and when he passed, she'd assumed everything would be straightforward. But now, hearing David's voice, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Tomorrow," she repeated. "Is everything okay?" David hesitated. Yeah, just some formalities. The lawyer said we need to all be there. I just wanted to give you a heads up." There was something off about his tone, but Helen brushed it off. "I'll be there," she replied, though doubt gnawed at her. She hung up and sat in silence, staring at the cup in her hands. Why the urgency? The following day, Helen drove to the law office, her mind racing. She had expected some formalities, some paperwork to go through, but the tension in the air was palpable when she arrived. David and her daughter, Anna, were already seated in the lawyer's office, both looking unusually stiff. David gave her a tight smile, his hands nervously fiddling with the papers on the table. Anna, who had always been a little more reserved, offered a brief, polite greeting, but there was a subtle unease in her eyes. The lawyer, Mr. Blake, was a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair and a formal air. He greeted them all before taking his seat. There was a brief silence as he shuffled through some papers. "I'm sure you're all aware of why we're here," Mr. Blake began. "The will of Frank Sullivan." He cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to the point." Helen's heart raced. She had expected this moment to be routine, everything settled, everything in order. But as Mr. Blake continued reading, the words started to hit her like a freight train. "And I, Frank Sullivan, leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home, all financial assets and other holdings, to my children, David Sullivan and Anna Sullivan. My wife, Helen Sullivan, is excluded from any inheritance or share of the estate." Helen's mind went blank. She could hear the words, but they didn't make sense. Excluded. She blinked, her eyes searching David's face for any sign of a mistake. Anna, too, avoided her gaze. The lawyer kept reading, but Helen couldn't focus. The words faded into the background as her mind raced. Why? Her thoughts were jumbled. Why was she excluded? Mr. Blake continued, detailing the estate and other minor possessions, but Helen's heart was no longer in the room. She had been excluded from everything. No explanation, no reasoning, just nothing. David finally looked up at her, his face tight. "Mom," he began, his voice faltering slightly, "it's not what you think." Helen couldn't speak. The room felt suffocating and the weight of betrayal hung heavily on her shoulders. She stared at David, the son she had raised, the one she had trusted. How could he? How could they do this to her? "Mr. Blake continued, unaware of the storm brewing in the room, but Helen had tuned him out. She was already processing the emotions bubbling inside of her. She wasn't just excluded from Frank's estate, she was excluded from their lives, from everything she thought she had built with them. As the reading ended, Helen stood up, numb. She felt like she was walking through a dream. The lawyer's words were still echoing in her ears, but she couldn't focus. David and Anna stood as well, but no one spoke. The silence between them was deafening. Finally, Helen turned to leave, her voice cold and distant. "I'll handle it myself," she said, though she wasn't sure how. David moved toward her. "Mom, please." She held up her hand. "Don't, I need to be alone." Helen walked out of the lawyer's office, her mind still reeling. She didn't know where to go, what to do, but she couldn't stay there, not with them, not like this. Her life had just been turned upside down, and she was left standing in the dark, alone, with only questions and a broken heart. Helen drove home in silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Excluded, she couldn't stop hearing it. It echoed in her mind with every turn she made. When she reached her house, she sat in the car for a moment, staring at the place she had shared with Frank for so many years. Why? She wasn't sure if she could face David and Anna again, not with the way things had unfolded. But one thing was certain, she was going to find out the truth. She wasn't going to let them or Frank's hidden secrets take away her peace. She would uncover what was really going on. And once she did, nothing would ever be the same. Helen's initial shock. Helen sat in her living room, the house quieter than it had ever felt before. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the walls, but Helen's mind was far from the peacefulness the evening typically brought. She could still hear the words of the lawyer echoing in her mind. Helen Sullivan is excluded from any inheritance or share of the estate. The weight of it, the finality of it, still hadn't fully settled in. She stood by the window, looking out at the neatly manicured garden, Frank's garden, the one he had loved so much. A lifetime of memories seemed to slip away as she processed the betrayal. Why wasn't she included? She had spent decades managing their finances, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She had kept their home intact, protected their family, and now this. The confusion and the hurt mingled inside her, threatening to consume her. She couldn't sit still anymore. Helen grabbed her purse and made her way to the study. She needed answers, fast, searching through Frank's papers. The study was the one room in the house that still felt like Frank's, a place where his old papers, books, and documents were carefully organized. Helen had always respected his meticulousness, but today, as she pulled open drawers and rummaged through files, it all felt foreign to her. She had spent countless hours in here, organizing their finances, sorting through bills, balancing accounts, but this was different. Today, she was looking for something she hadn't even known existed. It didn't take long before she noticed it. A folder, tucked under a stack of financial records, hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns. It wasn't labeled like the others. There was no identifying mark. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, flipping through the contents. Inside were papers, documents about business investments, large sums of money moving between offshore accounts, and vague references to something called Project G. The further she read, the more confused she became. The references were cryptic, and Helen recognized that these weren't the kinds of investments she had been involved with. Frank had never spoken to her about these. Why hadn't he mentioned them? Uncovering Frank's secret business. One document caught her eye. It was a ledger entry from a company called Green Tech Innovations, a tech startup that Helen had never heard of. The numbers were staggering. Large sums of money transferred between Frank's accounts and a man named Nick Green, someone Helen did not recognize. The business transactions seemed to go back several years, but it was the timing that caught her attention. These investments had begun around the same time that David and Anna had started becoming more involved in the family business. Helen could feel her heart race as she continued reading. What was going on? Why hadn't Frank told her about these investments? And why were these dealings so secret? Her mind spun with questions, but one thing was clear. These offshore accounts, the hidden business dealings, the mysterious Nick Green, they were the reason she had been excluded from the will. Helen slammed the folder shut, her hands trembling. This was no mistake. Frank had kept this from her, had purposely hidden these dealings, and in doing so had left her in the dark about everything, reaching out for help. Helen needed answers. She couldn't do this alone. She picked up the phone and dialed Thanh, her old friend and former detective, hoping he would be able to shed some light on the situation. "Hello." Thanh answered after a few rings. His voice was familiar and comforting, though it carried a hint of concern when Helen quickly explained the situation. "Thanh, I need your help," Helen said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "I found documents about Frank's business dealings. There's money, offshore accounts, and this man, Nick Green. I need to know what's really going on here. Can you help me?" There was a pause on the other end before Thanh responded. "Helen, I don't know what you've uncovered, but I'll help. Let me see what I can find. I'll start looking into this Nick Green and see if I can trace these transactions. But Helen, this is bigger than it looks. Stay calm." Helen hung up, feeling a small sense of relief. Thanh was good at what he did, and if anyone could unravel the mess Frank had left behind, it was him. The search for Nick Green. In the days that followed, Thanh worked tirelessly, tapping into his old contacts and pulling records from various sources. Helen could hardly sit still, waiting for news. Her house felt empty, her mind consumed with thoughts of betrayal. But she needed to know. She needed to understand why Frank had kept such a secret from her. Finally, Thanh called. "Helen, I've got something," Thanh said, his voice tight with urgency. "Nick Green isn't just some business partner. He's involved in some shady financial dealings. I found connections to several offshore companies, and these aren't just small-time operations. They're part of a much bigger network. Frank must have known what he was getting into. This wasn't just a bad investment, it was part of a larger, much riskier plan." Helen's breath caught in her throat. "But why didn't he tell me? Why keep me in the dark?" "I don't know, Helen, but one thing is certain, he was protecting you from something. It's not just the will, it's everything. There's a reason he left you out, and I think it's to shield you from whatever mess he got into. But I'll tell you this, there's more to this story, and you deserve to know the truth." Helen's mind was spinning. Frank had kept these secrets to protect her, but now it felt like the truth was slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. But she wasn't going to stop, not now. Helen's resolve. Helen sat down at her desk, the documents laid out before her. Project G, Nick Green. The offshore accounts. It all seemed like too much to take in, but one thing was clear. She was going to find out what had happened, no matter the cost. Frank had kept her in the dark, but now she would uncover the truth, piece by piece. The feeling of betrayal still burned inside her, but beneath it, something else began to grow, a quiet determination. She wasn't going to let this secret remain buried, and whatever it took, she would find out why she had been left out of Frank's will. Helen took a deep breath and set her mind to work. The investigation had only just begun. In this second act, Helen's shock from the will's reading gives way to a more methodical search for the truth. As she unearths hidden business dealings, offshore accounts, and mysterious figures like Nick Green, the emotional fallout deepens. But she begins to take control of her situation, reaching out for help and starting to unravel the mystery behind Frank's secrecy. Helen's growing resolve. The days following Than's investigation were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. Helen's house, once a quiet refuge, now felt like a battleground. Every document she uncovered seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The deeper she dug into Frank's secret dealings, the more she realized how much had been hidden from her. But as much as the betrayal stung, Helen knew she couldn't keep living in uncertainty. She had to confront her children, David and Anna. They were as much a part of this secret as Frank, and now it was time to face them. She had spent her whole life trusting them, but now that trust was shattered. She sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the situation heavy on her shoulders. How would they react when I tell them what I've found? Her mind raced, but she pushed the doubt aside. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She had to know the truth, and they were going to give it to her. The meeting. Helen arranged a meeting at her house, inviting David and Anna over. The tension was palpable as the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find her children standing on the doorstep. David's expression was guarded, his brow furrowed as usual. Anna, on the other hand, looked tense, her smile stiff. "Come in," Helen said, trying to keep her voice steady. She led them into the living room, gesturing for them to sit on the couch. David and Anna exchanged glances but remained silent as they sat. Helen took a deep breath and sat opposite them, folding her hands in her lap. "I know you both have been keeping something from me," Helen began, her voice calm but firm. "And I know you were involved in it. I found Frank's business records, the investments, the offshore accounts." Nick Green. David shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding hers. Anna sat with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom," David said, his voice tight. "What records? We didn't know anything about these so-called investments." Helen raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. "David, don't lie to me. I found everything, the transfers, the meetings, the hidden assets. Frank wasn't just involved in a bad business deal. He was hiding money from me and from both of you. Why was I left out of the will? Why did he exclude me from everything? And don't tell me it was to protect me. You and Anna knew about this, didn't you?" Anna uncrossed her arms and shifted in her seat, her voice quiet but defensive. "We didn't know everything, Mom. Frank kept us in the dark, too, but he was trying to shield you from all the mess. You don't understand. There was so much pressure on him. This whole thing with Nick Green, it was bigger than us." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Bigger than us? You mean bigger than me? Why didn't you tell me, Anna? Why didn't either of you warn me about Frank's mess? Why was I kept in the dark all this time?" David let out a frustrated sigh. "We didn't want to worry you, Mom. You were already handling so much. We thought you'd be better off not knowing." Helen shook her head, her emotions bubbling up. "Better off? You both thought I'd be better off not knowing the truth. You took everything from me. Frank took everything from me and you helped him. You thought I wouldn't find out." David's face darkened. "It wasn't like that, Mom. We were trying to protect you. But now that you've found out, there's nothing we can do." His voice cracked, and for the first time Helen saw a glimpse of guilt in his eyes. Anna, too, looked uncomfortable. "We just didn't want you to go through the pain of seeing what Frank was involved in. It wasn't easy. We were trying to keep it together." Helen felt a lump form in her throat, but she held it together. "Keep it together? By excluding me? By keeping me in the dark about everything that mattered? I've spent my whole life building a family, a life, and now I find out that it was all based on lies." The confession. The silence in the room grew thick as Helen stared at her children. The anger was still there, but beneath it something else stirred, a deep sadness. Her children, the ones she had trusted the most, had kept this secret from her. They had chosen to protect her from the truth, but in doing so they had betrayed her. Finally, David spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Mom, you were right. We should have told you, but we didn't know how to break the news. We didn't want you to be hurt. We wanted to keep the family intact." Helen's gaze softened slightly. In their minds, they had done it for her, but it didn't change the fact that she had been lied to. "David, Anna," she said, her voice firm but full of pain, "you didn't protect me. You kept me in the dark, and that hurt more than anything. I've spent years thinking I could trust you both with anything, but now I see that I've been nothing more than an afterthought." Anna's voice trembled as she spoke. "We never meant to hurt you, Mom. We didn't want to lose everything, and we thought if we kept it from you, it would be easier on all of us. But now, I see we were wrong." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, letting the emotions wash over her. She had never expected her children to keep secrets from her, not like this. But as much as she felt the sting of their betrayal, she knew she couldn't let it consume her. "You both need to understand something," Helen said, her voice calm but resolute. "Frank may have kept me out of his business, but I won't be kept out of my own future. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to find out what Frank was involved in and why he thought it was better to shut me out. David and Anna looked at each other, uncertainty in their eyes. For the first time, Helen saw them for what they truly were, people who had been caught in their own lies, trying to protect themselves rather than the family. I'm done being the victim, Helen continued. It's time I take control of my own life, and that includes uncovering the truth. The turning point. Helen stood up, her decision made. I'm going to find out everything. I'll hire a lawyer, dig deeper into Frank's dealings, and if necessary, I'll take this to the authorities. But I will not let Frank's mistakes, or yours, define my future. David stood up too, his face conflicted. We'll help, Mom. We're with you, I promise. Anna nodded slowly. We'll support you no matter what. But Helen was already moving toward the door. She wasn't sure if she could trust them again, but she knew one thing. She could trust herself. And that was all that mattered. In this act, Helen confronts her children, forcing them to admit their involvement in keeping secrets about Frank's business dealings. The emotional fallout continues, but it marks a turning point for Helen. She decides to take control of the situation and uncover the full truth, setting her on the path to reclaiming her life and future. Helen's growing resolve. After the heated confrontation with David and Anna, Helen retreated to her study, a room she once shared with Frank. The walls, lined with bookshelves filled with his favorite novels and financial records, now felt like a prison. But it was also the room where she would fight for herself, for the truth. The revelation that Frank had hidden so much from her still stung, but there was no time for tears, no time to wallow in the betrayal. Helen had made up her mind. She would uncover every last detail of Frank's secret dealings, and if it meant going up against her children, so be it. The truth would set her free. Than's investigation. Helen hadn't been idle since the confrontation. She'd spent the next few days gathering documents and speaking to Thanh, her old friend, who had agreed to help uncover the full extent of Frank's secret business. Thanh had a network of contacts from his years as a detective, and he wasted no time diving into Frank's finances. Helen, Thanh called her one evening, his voice serious. I found something you need to see. Helen sat up straighter, the words feeling like a shock to her chest. What is it? I've traced the offshore accounts. There's a lot more to this than I thought. These accounts weren't just for hiding losses, they were used to funnel money to various businesses, many of which have shady connections. One name keeps coming up, Nick Green. He's not just some small-time investor. He's linked to a bigger network, a group of people involved in financial manipulation and possibly fraud. Helen's heart pounded. Are you saying Frank was involved in illegal activities? I can't say for sure yet, but I'm digging deeper. But I can tell you one thing. Frank wasn't just protecting you from his bad investments. He was trying to protect you from the consequences of something bigger. The weight of those words sank deep into Helen's bones. She had known Frank was secretive, but this was more than she could have imagined. He had kept her in the dark not just to protect her from financial ruin, but possibly from something far worse. The hidden trust fund. Days later, Thanh returned with more information. I found a hidden clause in the will, he said, sitting down with Helen in the study. Frank set up a trust fund for you. He didn't leave it in the will to avoid drawing attention. The trust fund is linked to the very business dealings that have been kept from you. Helen sat still, trying to digest this new revelation. A trust fund? But I was excluded from the will. Why would he set up a trust for me if he excluded me from everything? Thanh leaned forward. Because Frank didn't want you to be a part of his financial mess. This fund was designed to protect you from the fallout, but it's only accessible under certain conditions. If you want to access it, you'll have to meet those conditions. Conditions that have everything to do with the business dealings he was involved in. Helen felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. So, all this time, Frank was trying to protect me, but he kept me out of everything because of his mistakes. Yes, Thanh said, but there's more. The fund isn't just about protecting you financially. It's also about keeping you away from people like Nick Green and the corrupt business practices that Frank was involved in. Frank's plan was to ensure you would never be dragged into the mess he created. Helen takes control. The following days were filled with intense research and legal consultation. Helen knew the road ahead would be difficult, but the truth was within her grasp. She hired a lawyer to help her access the trust fund, and with Than's help, she started piecing together the full scope of Frank's financial dealings. Helen sat at her desk late one evening, reviewing documents when a thought struck her. What if I could do more than just claim what's mine? Her mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just about securing her future anymore. It was about making sure Frank's secrets didn't destroy her or her children. She was going to take control of her life and her legacy. She called Thanh. I need to get ahead of this. I'm not just going to sit back and let things unfold. I'm going after everything Frank hid from me and from David and Anna. Than's voice was calm but encouraging. Helen, you've got the right idea. You have the trust fund, but you can also expose the truth. Bring it all to light, what Frank did, what David and Anna didn't tell you. It's time you reclaimed your power. Confronting David and Anna again. Helen knew the next step. She had to confront David and Anna once again, this time with the full truth in her hands. She invited them both over, and this time it was different. She wasn't coming from a place of hurt or confusion. She had all the facts, and she was no longer afraid to use them. David and Anna entered the house, but this time they didn't sit down right away. They were on edge, unsure of what was coming. Helen stood in front of them, calm and composed. I've uncovered everything, all of Frank's hidden assets, his offshore accounts, the business dealings with Nick Green, and the trust fund he set up for me. David opened his mouth to speak, but Helen held up a hand. I don't want excuses, David. I know everything. Frank tried to protect me, but he kept me in the dark for all the wrong reasons. Anna stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mom, we didn't know everything. We didn't know about Nick Green or the offshore accounts. Helen shook her head. You both knew. You knew enough to keep me out of the will. You knew enough to protect yourselves, but you didn't think about me. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. But that ends now. I'm not just going to take what's mine and leave it at that. I'm going after everything Frank was involved in, everything he hid from me. I'm going to expose it all, and if it means dragging the truth into the light, I will. Helen's new beginning. As David and Anna stood there, speechless, Helen felt a strange sense of empowerment. She wasn't angry anymore. She was resolved. The weight of the betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She was reclaiming her life, her legacy, and her future. The next day, Helen met with her lawyer to officially access the trust fund, and with Than's help, she began putting the pieces of Frank's hidden empire together. But she wasn't stopping there. She was going to take control of the business dealings Frank had left behind. The trust fund would secure her financial future, but exposing the truth would restore her peace of mind and dignity. As she sat in her office late that night, looking over the files and the paperwork, Helen realized something profound. No matter what Frank had done, no matter how his mistakes had impacted her life, she was the one who would take back control. She was the one who would shape her future. For the first time in a long time, Helen Sullivan felt free. In this act, Helen uncovers the truth about Frank's hidden business dealings, the secret trust fund, and her own path to taking control of her future. The confrontation with her children marks a turning point, and Helen decides to use her newfound knowledge to reclaim her life and legacy. The stage is set for her to expose the truth and secure her place, both financially and emotionally, in a world that had once betrayed her.